A truck driver told me this story when I was hitchhiking in the north of our homeland. He picked me up on the E-105 highway in the Murmansk region between Monchegorsk and Perenga. By that time I had been tramping for about 4 hours. It was dark. There was a forest all around. There was some kind of nature reserve there. I don't remember the name. It was getting late in the evening, but the cars were in no hurry to slow down. Even more so, when they saw me, they stepped on the gas, as if they wanted to get away as quickly as possible. And only this truck driver probably regretted it, and even then, in a strange way. He stopped about 100 meters ahead, leaned out of the passenger window and pointed the flashlight at me. The sun had already hidden behind the horizon, of course, but it wasn't that it was completely dark. And he didn't take his beam off me the entire way that I walked to the car. I approached. He didn't open the door. We exchanged a few words. He looked at me so suspiciously. And then, out of the blue, he told a joke. And I was tired, but this guy was so endearing to me, and what's even more so was the warm cabin of his Mercedes, that at first I laughed out of politeness, and then actually doubled over with laughter. When he saw this, he immediately opened the door. "Get in," he said. We started moving. He looked at me sideways. We chatted about different things. I even started to get a little nervous. And then he asked point blank what I forgot here at this time. I tell him that I want to hitchhike to Barents and that's all, but I was delayed on the highway because no one was picking me up. Then this guy grinned and said that I was lucky that he got me. Well, then in his words, "Here, after sunset, the side of the road is empty, San. Local villagers, city people, and only in cars fly through this area and don't stop. And while it's light, voters are being selected, but that's it, if they're familiar. I myself am from here, from Murmansk. I know the place well. I think I've traveled all over the region. And if, in the dark, someone on the side of the pedestrian sees a sneaker pressing into the floor and rushes past, we have a rumor that this is not an ordinary passenger. Well, like a story, the village grandmothers will tell you whatever you want. It depends on the skill. The legend is rather local, and I have heard it since childhood. In general, they wander here in the evenings, until midnight, along the road. In the dark, you can't make out what they look like, but no one has the courage to stop and take a closer look. Those who had enough will not tell. They call us fellow travelers, and they have been wandering around for probably 100 years. There were logging sites here, under the communists. The area was cleared for junctions and branches were made from the highway. Special contingents were brought from all over the Black Earth region. The places are remote. It's hard to get to populated areas without a map, so they didn't keep a very good watch over the camps. Where do you go from here? So one day, we were missing an entire shift at the sawmill. 12 people disappeared as if they had never existed. They rushed to look for them, pulled sailors from the base, combed the forest, and after about a week they began to catch them one by one. Prisoners, they only unite in front of the camp administration. As soon as they are released, each one begins to pull the blanket over himself. So they quarreled in the forests and scattered separately. 4, though they stuck to each other, 3 old and a young one. And this young man was not easy. The son of some party member, he made a frivolous noise. The folder did not excuse him. He had been sitting there for about 5 years, it seems, but the lessons managed to talk him out. At that time, a warning appeared in the newspapers of nearby cities, saying that you wouldn't set foot in the forest for mushrooms and berries. Otherwise, you never know. Orientations for the departments were posted, and when they began to find them, they calmed down. Well, the newspaper people, and those who were not directly involved in the search, calmed down. There, San, there was such a thing that captured loners told creepy things about morals, these 3, the oldest hurricanes, and each next one is more and more terrible. When, in addition to those 4, the rest were caught, The cops ran around like they had been shot. Do you know who is called canned food in the camps? That's it. Do you dare now? The last one caught told them that the food was over. The trio of instigators began to look at their NZ. That's why the rest ran away. They themselves felt sick. That kid's folder howled, and he personally wandered through the forests with search engines. And there is not a word in the newspapers so as not to cause panic. We found him, in short. I managed to overcome hunger earlier. And the worst thing is that they literally didn't reach the highway a kilometer away. They would have gotten something to eat there. After this, the authorities secretly ordered to nail them on the spot. And yet they shot a couple of days later. They hid in the swamps, thinking that there wouldn't be much search for them there. They were having a meal when the sailors jumped out at them. They didn't even have time to gnaw the bones properly. The bodies were loaded onto an all-terrain vehicle and taken to the city, but it took it and fell into a quagmire. The driver barely managed to jump out, so they left them in the swamp. And after a couple of seasons, people began to disappear in this area. Those who set out on foot along the road in the evening are on the list of missing persons. People started to be cautious. They stopped walking here. Everything seemed to calm down for a year, and then they started finding empty cars on the side of the road. Everything is like one. Its nose is dug into the ground, as if it jumped off the road at speed. The doors are wide open. Things are turned over, and there is not a trace around. I sinned, and they set up raiders, patrols, and ambushes, but to no avail. And the people around are not the police. They have no shame in believing in devilry. Therefore, when rumors about strange people standing on the road at night began to spread, they immediately realized everything. Then they almost stopped finding empty cars. No one stopped. It still happens rarely, but the numbers there are not local. Those who pass by this devilry say that when the light hits their eyes, it is immediately clear that there is no person there, because they glow like two saucers, and the longer they go without food, the wider their eyes are. That's why I was shining it in your eyes, checking. And another driver, from Murmansk, said that out of ignorance he once stopped a truck at night. What saved him was that the cabin was high and he couldn't immediately reach the window. Just as he was about to lower the window to talk, like me and you, this creature was already standing under the door. It's dark, you can't see anything, and she says to him, "Open up, man, I ask you from the bottom of my heart." The driver crossed himself, immediately fired up his car and drove off into the distance. He says that people don't wheeze like that and don't look at you from the darkness like wolves. When he started accelerating, there was a loud bang on the door. Good. Metal. This creature didn't reach the window. The glass would immediately crumble. He ran for a long time and didn't sleep a wink until the morning. At the first light, I found a parking lot where people were and stood there. He came out, looked at the door, and there wasn't a dent. There was a gap, as if the reinforcement had been stuck in and pulled through. The men who were in the parking lot crowded together when they saw this case and told him everything. They say that sometimes human bones are found in the swamps, piled up and gnawed white. And when a whole group of foreign tourists disappeared here, the cops launched a raid through the forests. They walked for a long time until they finally found the sucked bones, and among them, sharpening from a nail, the kind they make behind bars. After those events, by the way, there were no incidents for a long time. We've eaten, apparently. That's how things are, San. I won't lie. As much as I've been traveling, I've never seen anything like this myself. Sometimes something sparkled in the headlights, but it could have been foxes or wolves that still roam around here. And one day something flashed across the road. Large, as big as a man, but moved like an animal. Maybe a wolf, or maybe one of these. Be that as it may, no one has gone missing here for a long time, and empty cars have not been found, about 3 or 4 years. Either it has calmed down, or they are all lying. One thing is frightening. If these creatures are really hungry, they are probably hungry. I listened to this man, listening to the rhythmic rocking of the cabin, while at the same time fighting sleep. Of course, it's scary to imagine such a thing at night, but so tired after those few hours of walking, my body happily fell into slumber. The driver continued to tell stories, and answering him sluggishly, I was already leaning against the window and starting to doze off. Road signs, trees, poles flashed past, and rare oncoming cars did nothing to dilute the emptiness of the night highway. Half asleep, I looked at the glare that had been floating among the trees for several minutes. It was as if the light of the moon was falling on the reflectors of the bicycle. You know, I'm not one of the timid ones, and I heard worse stories and even practically took part. But then I got a cramp. The yearning long-distance driver continued his stream of speech, and I became horrified by two huge glowing eyes in the thicket, moving parallel to our car and not taking their attentive and very hungry gaze off me. It chilled me to the bone. I turned to the driver, noticing that he suddenly fell silent and stared at the road. The silhouette on the side of the road was quickly approaching, and I was torn by two feelings: to squeeze into the seat and become invisible, and at the same time to stick to the glass and see, as far as possible in the dark, this voter as we passed by. "Oh, Sonia, how lucky you are that I picked you up," the driver muttered then, without taking his eyes off the creepy figure. Most of all, she resembled a cat staring at you from the darkness, in whose eyes the light from a flashlight was reflected. Our truck was moving at a decent speed, and this was at least a little reassuring, but at the same time we drove so fast that everything turned into a blur, and somewhere on the edge of hearing, a disappointed howl reached me. Something started to puff right outside my door. I looked out the window and, "Drop me off. We won't touch you. He's ours. Our prey. Why did he pick you up?" A wheezing, growling, out-of-breath voice came from the other side of the cabin. The exact same shadow as the one under my door moved in leaps and bounds after the truck and demanded to address the distant driver. The man frowned, pursed his lips, and only stepped on the gas, forcing the creatures to stay. We drove on in oppressive silence until the truck driver groaned and pressed the horn button. I jumped from the deafening beep and peered into the distance. A car rushing from the left suddenly swerved to the side, and I managed to see a shadow flash right in front of it, jumping out across the street. Jumping into oncoming traffic, she barely managed to avoid a head-on collision. In the illuminated in the salon, a man and a woman, judging by the horror on their faces, were already saying goodbye to life. Children's hands grabbed the back of the driver's seat. He stopped right in the middle of the road. We gave. They looked at each other, and the first impulse to stop and intervene immediately passed when the side mirrors finally reflected what was happening around the unfortunate people's car. Remember these coordinates: Murmansk region, Highway E105, section between Monchegorsk and Perenga. Never stop there after sunset.